Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Tom Rifai. I am the editor for News of the Day, NOTeD, brought to you by the True Health Initiative. And I am honored to have Dr. Chip Lavie with us today from the Ochsner Medical System. He is the director of the cardiac rehabilitation program there. And his resume is really, and there is no question about it. We're talking about quadruple numbers of peer-reviewed articles that he has led or been involved in. All you have to do is do a Google search. And I would rather discuss with Dr. Lavie some more of his own personal background and what drives him. But our main topic today, Chip, if you will, please call me Tom.
All right, Tom.
Is we're going to talk about, is there such a thing as over-exercise? We're darn well sure there's under-exercise. We're darn well sure there's too little of movement, and we're gonna, of course, right after this, I'm sure you and I will break up our sitting time by popping out of our chairs and walking and taking those opportunities. But the question really becomes, is there such a thing as over-exercise, and pushing it beyond a limit that might be helpful for health. And I do want to give a shout out to Dr. Peter McCullough, who is a common contact and friend between us that put me in contact with you. So thank you so much, Peter. Before we do that, can we learn just a little bit about what the heck got you interested in cardiology and how you ended up in the position that you are today? What was there a passion, interest behind it?
So even in medical school, I knew that even back then, the leading cause of death in the United States and the world was cardiovascular disease. And the main thing was atherosclerosis. And so I got interested in atherosclerosis my first year in medical school. We had a focus group, and I was the leader of the focus group, and our topic was atherosclerosis. And LSU Medical School back then, people like Jack Strong were doing the early studies from the Bogalusa heart study, showing that atherosclerosis was forming in kids. So if kids died from a car accident, they found fatty streaks in their aorta, very early signs of hardening of the arteries in young kids. So it starts very early in life. And so that just got me interested in it. And then adding to that, my dad, during my first year, actually beginning of my second year of medical school, had a sudden death. He got resuscitated and had bypass surgery. And he did well for many years afterwards. But that actually, fostered the interest in that topic even further.
Wow.
And so, so it's been a good journey since.
Wow. That's notable. And, for those that may not quite know, and I'd like your thoughts on how I sometimes characterize atherosclerosis. To me, I call it acne of the arteries, in the sense that, a pimple and the microanatomy of a plaque have a lot of similarities, except for the invader, of course, in acne is a bacteria. And in the other case, it's, LDL particles driving itself, but still that inflammatory response, that bubble, and the kind of popping of the pimple with the blood clot that develops on top. And it's not something that is at all a clear and obvious issue, right? If I'm not mistaken, something like 1/3 of cases, the first symptom of coronary artery disease is sudden death, or something along those lines. Is that correct?
That's correct. So for many people, unfortunately, their first, only, and last manifestation of atherosclerosis is sudden cardiac death. And so the only thing that could have helped them would have been preventing it in the first place. So it wouldn't be, so obviously there's some people that get symptoms. And again, when somebody drops dead, you don't know for sure, did they have symptoms before? Did they have symptoms a week ago that they didn't mention? But at least as far as we know, that, the spouse didn't know about it, the family didn't know about it. And I do think probably for many people, they probably didn't have symptoms. Or there certainly was some that probably had some indigestion that they thought was, related to the food tube, and acid reflux and not heart. Or maybe they thought they had musculoskeletal pain, and maybe some people mistook their heart pain for something else. But I do think probably very many didn't have symptoms at all, and they had a sudden rupture of the plaque, that you described as popping of the pimple and getting a blood clot on it. and they had a plaque that ruptured and got a blood clot on it and closed off their artery and cut off the blood supply that then led to a fatal arrhythmia. And so if sudden death was the first manifestation, the only way to have prevented that would have been to prevent the disease from progressing in the first place.
You know, and we are all kind of take notice when you see a big name like, you know, James Gandolfini or someone that has this kind of sudden event. But this is far from uncommon. The numbers are approximately what, in terms of the number of people that die per year of coronary artery disease? What is, or even you could say cardiovascular disease, I guess, in general, but in whatever way you'd like to characterize, so people get an idea, the massive problem and the potential for prevention that is an opportunity for us.
Yeah, it's a tremendous number. You know, you're talking about 500,000, you know, people, you know, to have this and that, you know, and that's per year. And that, you know, that's kind of the stat right now. They say that the number of people in the United States that have died from COVID this year, you know, well, that's how many die, you know, from cardiovascular disease from a sudden event. A lot more actually die from cardiovascular disease if you count, you know, heart failure and all the things that lead to death from cardiovascular disease. But just, you know, sudden heart attack is a very large number of people.
And I not ironically, I guess now that understanding the data, those people with this type of cardiometabolic disease even increase their susceptibility for severe COVID. So all the more reason why people are interested in prevention. This is a big area that you are leading at Ochsner, and in terms of cardiac rehabilitation. And the issue, of course, many people look to is exercise, and it is a critical tool. There is no question about it. That leads us to the question, of course, though, is there too much of a good thing? I think we're pretty clear, and let's see if we can lay the groundwork. We know that what Chip and I are doing right now, which we try to minimize, I try to keep it under 3 hours a day of sitting. I think the American average is around 7 or 8, just if you want to, you know, kind of quantify it. There's way too much of that going around. That's there's no doubt about that.
And there's a lot of people that have 10 to 12 hours of sitting per day.
Correct. That's right. Now, on the other end, the question becomes: is there too much of a good thing? And a question I'll ask you as well, and maybe we could start the wrap it into the conversation somewhere, is if somebody really is stuck. I mean, maybe they could do alternating sitting and standing, but they're really stuck, relatively stationary. What amount of exercise might be able to combat that without going off into the too much zone? So, in terms of a yes or no, and then lead the issue, is there a point in which physical activity becomes more of an issue, maybe for joy or personal goals, but may have passed a threshold that is any longer contributing to health outcomes or longevity per se?
Well, that's absolutely the case, because there's certainly, we know that, for example, when someone, you know, when a group of people go out and run a marathon, you know, a 26.2 mile running race, if you study their heart with sound wave tests to measure the function, or you do blood tests to look for things like troponin, that's the protein that's released in heart attack, or brain natriuretic peptide, abbreviated BNP, that's the protein that we assessed in heart failure. About a third of the marathon participants will show some dysfunction of their heart right after the marathon, particularly the right side of the heart. And about a third release troponin and brain natriuretic peptide. So obvious that some bad things are happening just from running a 26.2 mile race. Now, by far the majority, this all resolves days and a week after the race, and everything comes back to normal. But shows that a very extreme amount of exercise can produce damage. And if someone's doing that extreme exercise very often, you know, let's say somebody's running a marathon, you know, there's people that run a marathon on consecutive days, or, you know, you see a person that ran a marathon for 7 straight days, or once a week for every week of the year. You know, so some people are doing very, very large amounts of exercise, and so there is potential harm, and I think the key is one has to focus on what is the goal of the exercise. So if the goal of the exercise is to improve performance in your sport, well, you have to do a fair amount of exercise to do that. If someone's going to try to win the Boston Marathon, and that's their goal, or to place in the Boston Marathon, or to be in the Olympics for the marathon, well, they have to train very hard, and they can't just go out and do 30, 40 minutes of exercise. So their goal is athletic performance. Their goal is not health. But if one's goal is health, then you reach the maximum benefits of exercise at much lower levels. Certainly it looks like you get almost all of the benefit in the first 30 minutes, but certainly you get the benefit in the first hour. And so someone who's doing many hours of exercise, you're going way beyond what you need to do for health. And there's even potential to lose some health benefits as the exercise progresses. And so you can maximize the benefit at relatively low levels. And just for example, Tom, we published a big study in JACC, which is our leading cardiology journal, back in 2014. It was a study of 55,000 people, and we looked at the data from 13,000 runners versus 42,000 non-runners. And the runners, not surprisingly, over a 10 to 15 year follow-up, had about a 30% lower risk of death and about a 45% lower risk of cardiovascular death. But when we divided the runners into dosing, we looked at miles per week, times per week, minutes per week. We found that those who were in the lowest quintile of dose, the lowest 20% of the dose of the runners, they had the same benefits on mortality and cardiovascular mortality as did those in the higher doses. And in the highest quintile, there actually appeared to be some loss of benefit. We later did a paper the next year or two in the Mayo Clinic proceedings where we looked at that highest quintile, and that the highest 20% of the runners, and divided that quintile into tertiles. So we basically got to the top 8% of runners. And this is people running, basically the top 8% were basically running just low 30 miles per week. People, typically marathon type runners or long distance runners. And we found that group appeared to lose the benefit. Not worse than non-runners, but worse than lower dose runners. Now, again, if their purpose is to run the race better and they care about their running times, you have to do more. If somebody's wanting to improve their running time and they want to place in the race or want to, they're competitive runners, either at a really high level or they just competing at their own age group level in their own town. Well, if you want to be your top performance, you have to train harder.
That's right.
And more often. But if your goal is to improve your health, you can get the health benefits at way lower levels. And I think that's the biggest key because, you mentioned this earlier. We know we have an under-exercise problem. So the problem in the country and the world is not over-exercise. There's a small group of people that are doing really high amounts, and some of them probably maybe would cut down their dose if they knew that they were actually losing some of the health benefits. But many of them who are doing the very high levels are not really doing it for health. People jump off of mountains and jump out of planes and race boats, and they're not doing that for health. They're doing that for sport, for thrill, for friendships, but they're not doing it for health reasons. And so there are people that are exercising at high levels that are doing it for another reason.
Absolutely.
And they're not the problem with the world because they're a very small group of people. The problem in the world is under exercise. And so we need to get the majority of people to be getting the minimum amounts of exercise that produced substantial health benefits.
Right, and I would say, and maybe we'll discuss a little bit further, maybe even to complement that, if you can't get a level that that Dr. Lavie might mention could counter all the sitting, is to complement some exercise with some non-exercise activity time. But I could give you a great example of where these days there are high-level athletes that certainly are doing it for health, and it's in the mixed martial arts world, where they're dehydrating themselves to get down to a certain weight. They're dealing with injury and traumatic head injury. So while that's an extreme example, I think that your point is well taken. There are certain times where you have to do things. Even maybe Arnold Schwarzenegger would argue that all the steroids he took and everything was worth it, not because it was good for his health, but it got him to where he was. But that is a really small group, yet you have answered the question, is there too much? Potentially, yes. But the other part of your message that I think is really fascinating is you get a lot with less than you might think, that it might be more the consistency of exercise than the intensity. So people who are thinking, well, I got to go sweat, I've got to go vomit on a treadmill, like some TV show regarding, that's not the case. And would you agree that in those cases where they might not be able to get to the hour, and maybe even otherwise, there could be some argument for specific benefits of not chronically sitting, that for most people as well, while they might, and I want to hear the amount that would be necessary to counter the 8 to 10 hours of sitting, that it might be best to complement structured exercise with some dedication to non-exercise activity time, to getting up and moving about the cabin, and easy things like taking calls while walking, or parking further from the grocery store, taking the stairs instead of the elevator, etc.
Yeah. So Tom, really, in a perfect situation, the perfect situation would be someone who is doing a good amount of exercise. And we'll talk about what's a good amount. I mean, typically you're talking about doing some, physical activity for 30 to 40 minutes, most days, which would be a fast walk, a slow jog, a bicycle, elliptical machine, swimming, cross country, ski, dance, etc. Some physical activity, shooting for 30 to 40 minutes, many days, and avoiding prolonged sitting, at least, preventing the 8 to 10 to 12 hours of sitting per day. If someone's going to sit for long hours, the recommendation now is to try to get up every 30 to 45 minutes and move around, even if it's just for 30 seconds or 1 minute. You could do that by, theoretically, I'm sitting down. It looks like you're sitting down right now. We could be doing this interview standing up on a standing, desk. So some people can do that when they're working for prolonged periods of time. And people could, you theoretically could watch the television standing, and stretching, and you don't have to sit on the couch the whole time. But if you are going to sit for prolonged periods of time, most of the evidence appears that you can negate most of the detriments of prolonged sitting by doing a fair amount of exercise. You may not totally be able to eliminate. There are some studies that suggest that you totally eliminate the bad effects of sitting by doing a good amount of exercise. But at least almost all the studies show you mostly negate the negatives. So somebody who's going out and doing a run in the morning, for 45 minutes, and then sits for 10 hours of the day, most of the studies show that run in the morning negated the harmful effects. There are some studies that still say that there's still some harmful effect of the prolonged sitting. And so again, the ideal is to do both, do a physical activity and prevent the prolonged sitting. But again, I do think that some people are really in their job. It's not easy to that they 2 hours go by and they haven't been out the chair, because they've been busy the whole time, on the phone, on the computer, in the middle of meetings. And it's sometimes hard to be on a meeting with 20 people and be, standing up and doing some calisthenics.
And that's why it's great to have an expert like you and speaking in terms of practical opportunities that real people might decide to take. Whatever you can do to improve your movement gain is going to be helpful.
And then regarding the movement, so there have been studies. So first of all, all the guidelines are saying that people should, and this came out in the federal guidelines in 2018. They just had the WHO basically had guidelines that just came out, and it's published in British Journal of Sports Medicine. Basically, is saying that people should be doing 150 to 300 minutes per week of moderate to vigorous physical activity, plus a couple of times a week of resistance exercise. We have actually shown though, and there's papers that show that if you don't reach that level, you can still get substantial benefits. You know, for example, there was a paper in Lancet by Wynn, I think it was in 2011, that got a lot of publicity because they showed that just 10 minutes of exercise per day produced something like a 15% lower mortality rate. And so that was a good headline in the papers. All you had to do is 10 minutes of exercise. Well, the point that they lose the point that if you did a little bit more than 10 minutes, you got more mortality benefits, but you got some benefits from just 10 minutes. If you do higher intensity exercise, like running would be a higher intensity, and I'm a runner, so I mean, but there's other high intensity. You can do high intensity exercise on the bike, on the elliptical machine. Means just reaching a higher percentage of your heart rate for shorter amounts of time. But in our running data, we showed that people that only are running for 50 minutes a week, running less than 6 miles a week, but running 1 or 2 times per week, were getting what appeared to be most of the benefit from a cardiovascular mortality standpoint. Now, those would clearly not be enough running to do well in races. But since running is higher intensity, you get a lot of a benefit from a shorter amount of running. So if somebody did go out and just run, 30 minutes twice a week, they'd be getting substantial benefit. Or if you theoretically went out and ran 10 or 15 minutes 5 days a week, you'd be getting substantial benefit without taking a lot of time. Yes. And I think that's one of the big things that many people, when you ask them why they're not exercising, many people's answer is that they don't have time.
That's right. I have a question then in terms of that specifically, which it tells us, first of all, what Chip is saying is, again, every bit counts, and you're in just the opposite of diminishing returns, which we're talking about at the other end of maybe where there's a point where it doesn't help anymore, maybe even there's potential harm. The good news is that you get a big bulk, not all of it. So please keep going beyond 10 minutes, but it's so powerful that if that's your foot in the door, don't believe that to get started, you need to hit 30 minutes to 45 minutes a day. You could start with 10 and chip and build from there. The other question I have for you is in regards to something you just passingly mentioned, which was how much can or how does resistance exercise work? And let me just add a little bit of personal thought to it, and as one that from my end, I'm the resistance exerciser, and I have to work on the cardiovascular, and you probably have a resistance routine as well, because I imagine you just mentioned the guidelines and you like to abide by them. And I tend to focus more on high reps, and I don't rest really between sets. I tend to be the guy jogging around the gym. I make sure I don't run into anyone. It's just the Chip. Me and a treadmill have a I don't even say love-hate. I would say it will tolerate-hate relationship. I'll do the treadmill if I have to, but I'd rather be physically moving. So is there a way that you could perceive that you could do a higher repetition in terms of exercise being a continuum? It's not always marathon versus power lifter. There can be a type of resistance training that's more toning, high reps, not really taking breaks between sets. And how does that work?
So in fact, what you're describing right now, Tom, is you getting some aerobic exercise from your weightlifting, because if you're not taking breaks, you're moving quickly to the next set. You're not just doing 3 reps where you can barely get the weight up. You're doing where you're doing 15 reps, and then moving to the next thing and doing 15 reps, and you're not letting your heart rate drop down. So you're probably constantly having a little bit elevated heart rate, maybe not the same as on the run, but you have an elevated heart rate. So you are actually getting both resistance and aerobic training at the same time. And if you're doing that for 20, 30, 40 minutes, then you're getting a pretty good combined workout, and that would be actually a quite good way to do it. I think many people probably just do the two separately, and if you're going to do it separately, you can probably get your resistance training from 10-15 minutes of weight training twice a week, just doing the main big muscle groups, just doing 15 reps and taking a break and moving to the next one. That would work too for the resistance training, but I think you're trying to combine them both into one, and I think that should work.
Well, I appreciate that. So I'm good now. I'm Dr. Lavie approved, because I'm always trying to find ways to save time for myself. But this is the theme of this is for everyone in terms of the issue you brought up. Time is a big barrier. So what can we get done in less time? So I've given an example from my personal experience, but can you talk to us a little bit about the concept of how you could leverage interval training to compress the time as well? For those that are willing to do it, I don't know, we take someone that's sedentary and put them into high intensity intervals, but nevertheless, for those that don't have a lot of time, where is the equivalency between consistent, continuous, moderate versus a high intensity, and how can that be compressed in terms of time?
Yeah, so actually most studies that have assessed that what would be the best exercise, would it be just going out and doing a slow workout for 30-40 minutes, or would it be better to do intervals where you get your heart rate higher for smaller parts of time, take a little break, then get it up high again, then take a break, get it up high again? Most of the studies show that the high intensity interval training improve cardiorespiratory fitness more and improve heart structure and function more. There's very little randomized studies that look at long-term clinical events with interval versus moderate training, but the small studies that look at the soft endpoints, which are strong soft endpoints though, like cardiorespiratory fitness and heart structure and function, always show that the high intensity interval training produces better results. And if you think about it, athletes train by doing high intensity training. You're not going to go out and run a good mile by just going out and running slow every day. You're going to have to run some quarter miles fast to improve your performance. And that improving your performance is also, not only improving your running time, but it's also improving your fitness and things that make the heart pump better and more efficiently. And you can do the high intensity in shorter amounts of time. So instead of, going out and running an hour, if someone did 20 or 30 minutes of fast run for 2 or 3 minutes and then slow for a minute, fast run for 2 or 3 minutes, slow for a minute, they would be able to get the maximum benefit much quicker. Now, the problem would be you can't do that every day. But you don't need to. If you did that 2 or 3 times a week, that would be plenty. But if you wanted to do the high intensity for small amount of time, a couple of times a week, and then do a small 10-15 minutes of weights a couple of times a week, that would be a really terrific overall health exercise regimen.
I like the practicality of what you're bringing to this, because some of the guidelines, and I'd like you to clarify them, give a specific time of either or, and you're saying it's really not. It's quite possible, and probably you should mix things up. That when you're going high intensity, the body needs some recovery time. But the guidelines I've seen were 150 to 300 minutes of continuous moderate could be equivalent to, and you give it 75 minutes. You clarify that.
Yeah. So actually, the federal guidelines say 150 to 300 minutes a week of combined, or just 75 minutes per week of higher intensity. And higher intensity would be basically not necessarily, they don't mean doing interval training. They just mean doing, like running instead of walking. And they mean biking hard instead of just going out on a leisurely, bike ride. Doing the elliptical machine hard, where your heart rate's, higher than just doing a slow interval. And if you think about 75 minutes per week, that's only, I have to do the math again, but I think that's 15 minutes, 5 days a week, so that's not a lot of That's not a lot, or 25 minutes 3 times a week. You know, that would be, that's not that much time. And actually, as I mentioned earlier, we showed that even with less than that with running, you appear to reach the maximal benefit. You know, so the guidelines don't ever just take one study. They're not just going to look at our one running study and say, oh, well, this is what we're going to tell everybody to do. Well, first of all, you know, you're not going to ever tell people you got to run. You know, what if somebody doesn't want to run? What if they don't have the body to run? What if their knees and hips aren't going to allow them to run? You can't tell people that you have to run. And some people are not going to like running. You know, many people don't like running. Many people love it, but you know, many people would not like to do that at all. But again, so even the guidelines just say that if you're doing higher intensity, you can do a lot less to reach the maximum health benefits.
So, a question then for you that kind of brings us back into the True Health Initiative kind of thought process and how it was inspired by one of the co-founders. You know, one was Dr. David Katz. The other one was Dan Buettner, who was, of course, the leader of the whole Blue Zones National Geographic project with the National Institutes of Aging and trying to identify these hot spots on Earth where people tend to live healthy into nonagenarian and centenarian status. And, you know, Sardinia, Italy, with the goat herders and sheep shepherds, and the Nicoya, Costa Rica, the farmers and the gardeners of Okinawa, et cetera. And how you might perceive the most common source of physical activity tends to be walking. Now, going to Sardinia and seeing the mountains, I can tell you it's not just a simple walk, but they don't technically have structured exercise. So how do we translate what must be happening to them in their clearly 10,000 step days, but but some, it's not always the same. I mean, farming isn't going to be walking up and down a hill, and gardening is going to have different movement. I guess it goes back to just move. But how do you translate this concept that it's really about activity, and that maybe we need exercise in America just because we have such a lack of physical labor related lifestyle that it's inevitable. You're almost going to need, unless you're one of those rare people that really is active all day long, and what few jobs that are left like that, especially in Zoom world, that's why we need exercise. But these blue zones do make sense. Their activity, despite lack of structured exercise.
Yeah, the hunter and gatherers, you didn't have to tell them you need to go get exercise. They couldn't avoid exercise. They were getting it in a natural way, natural environment. We've actually published papers showing that if you just examine, for example, people's occupational physical activity over 5 decades. 5 decades ago, people were pretty active at the work sites. Now, with industrialization, even people who have physical jobs aren't getting nearly the physical activity that they were, 5 decades earlier. We actually quantified in a paper that got a lot of publicity in the news media, household management energy expenditure in women over 5 decades. And we showed over 5 decades, and that's basically housework in women. And we showed over 5 decades, the amount of energy expenditure doing housework has markedly declined, because 5 decades ago, women had to do a fair amount of physical work to keep up the house. And now, they don't have to because of machinery and everything's automated. And so to make up for that, we have to formalize physical activity. It's just not coming naturally anymore. You can do some things naturally, like just not taking elevators and taking stairs. You could not park in the closest spot to wherever you're going. You could do some things to try to manufacture some extra physical activity. But for the most part, we have to think about, how am I going to get my physical activity? We have to plan it, as opposed to just it coming naturally in the workday, in the daily activities. And so decades ago, and maybe still in some parts of the world, people naturally get it. But that's a real minority people who can just get it in the daily. I do have some patients that show me that they're getting 15,000 steps a day and they don't exercise, but there are still people that are walking all day on their job. you know, and climbing stairs and climbing ladders, and, you know, and you know, they can pull it out on their phone and show you, you know, how many steps they're getting, and they're proud of it, you know, but that's the minority. Most people, if you're going to get, you know, lots of steps, and if you're going to get quality steps, you have to do it by, you know, planning an exercise.
Yes, and ultimately, I think our message are at the end of this and wrapping it up is every little bit of movement counts. Non-exercise, exercise. Probably most of us, it's going to be a blend to get to where we need to go.
What was fun is that the federal guidelines that we were dealing with for a couple of decades basically said back decades ago that you only counted activity that occurred in 5 and 10 minute bouts. And now the guidelines say all movement counts. You know, they've changed that. That was a big mistake. You know, so even in 1 minute bouts, even going up 3 flights of stairs, you know, that only takes 1 minute. It all is additive, you know, and so you don't have to get your exercise all in one lump. You can get your exercise in 5 to 10 minute lumps, or lots of 1 and 2 minute lumps. You know, it's the total amount that really matters. I think from an efficiency standpoint, many people find it easier to knock off the exercise in one small time spot, whether that be 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, you know, but to get it out in one spot. But people that's not convenient for can get their exercise in a bunch of small bouts per day, and it all adds up, you know. So you can do a 10 or 15 minute exercise, you can walk the stairs, you can park, you know, your car further away and do some walks, and it all, if it's adding up to a good amount of total physical activity, I mean, that's the bottom line.
So we have really helped people find where reality meets science here, from a weight training resistance trainer to a runner, that we all agree on the more movement, the better. Anything that you can get is going to be great. Yes, sure, there might be some people who over-exercise, but the risk is more in the opposite. And don't let the barriers of I need to do this or that. And by the way, if you're on the 8th floor, fine, start by taking the elevator to the 6th or 7th floor, and then you can build from there. You know, every little bit counts. Dr. Chip Lavie, Director of Cardiac Rehabilitation at the Ochsner Health System, thank you so much. This has been a great, I think, opportunity for people to learn from a true expert. And you spoke in common language that people can take and make actionable today. I can't thank you enough for your time.
Well, thanks for having me, Tom. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Have a great day.
Okay.